to really streamline their processes. So it's probably, I suppose one of the questions I put out to you this morning is just think within your own businesses and things, are there areas or pockets within the business where these characteristics tend to fall into place, and perhaps there's an opportunity to use some of the newer technologies or to use some of the newer self-serve type mechanisms in order to really increase that profitability. So moving on then to look at some of the key metrics. So we typically, as salespeople, would have spent a lot of time looking at our acquisition costs. So as we built our businesses out over the years, my own background would have been within Eircom, and as we built out Eircom.net in terms of the new market of internet customers, we were always looking at our acquisition costs, and we were building the business very, very quickly. So in this example here, you see a company with two key products, product one and product two, and you're looking at then your cost to acquire and your cost to serve. So in terms of product one, you'll see that the cost to acquire is actually quite low, but the cost to acquire of product two is actually very, very high. And sometimes we might feel, the acquisition cost is too high, we're not going to take that customer on board. But when you look at the cost to acquire combined with the cost to serve, and you see, product two is very expensive to acquire, but in terms of the cost to serve, that's very, very low. Plus, if you also know that those customers tend to be very loyal, that you get a long lifetime value, then the investment you've made in high acquisition costs is actually really, really worthwhile, because over the long term, you're actually taking on board a very, very profitable group of customers. Where you see in terms of product one, because the cost to serve is much, much higher, they're in the long term, they're actually not as profitable as you might feel. So that really highlights, by really looking at your cost to acquire and cost to serve in combination, and also another area is potentially to look at your cost of retention. If it is a very competitive business and there's a lot of people churning away, that you may, by putting some extra effort maybe into cost to serve, will minimise your cost of retention. So this is really, really, really applicable if you have a product set where you have quite a number of products or quite a number of services, and to be able to get that layer of detail on a per product basis can really, and this is all about giving you the facts to make decisions that you can then drive your own businesses forward in the way that's going to deliver the performance. So just to give you a case example in terms of how the cost to serve can really give you that layer of information. This is a client of ours in the hospitality space, and just to give you a sense of, now we all know hospitality is very, very tough space at the moment, but you see the two clear areas where they are making profit are in the food and beverage space and also in the weddings. And you see there where they're losing money is very much in the accommodation and other parts there. And I suppose one of the challenges over the last number of years, every hotel in the country seemed to be adding the leisure centre and the spa. It was if they didn't have that in their armoury, people just wouldn't stay there. So a few things to note here. By having this layer of information, it now allowed the business and each department manager for each area to have that transparent and forensic layer of detail about their own area. So it now allows them to put programmes in place and to take ownership and responsibility for that. So for example, in the accommodation space, they may now decide to outsource all of the laundry because they have the costs stack of what it takes to do the laundry in-house. They can now look for more competitive ways of doing that. The other key point is they now know in terms of sales and marketing where they need to focus their efforts. So a huge push for the weddings, a huge push to drive the food and beverage, and to really look at those promotional campaigns. One campaign I saw recently was one of the Marriott hotels appeared on the city deal, the deal that comes in every morning, and they were offering accommodation for two people overnight for €55, which is pretty phenomenal. So in terms of cost of acquisition, that was probably quite high, but I actually know the hotel in question, and they were saying in the 24-hour period they got 2,500 bookings, which was fabulous. And from their point of view, their strategy is getting the people in, but it's the whole upsell. So how much food and beverage can they get those people to drink? So high cost of acquisition, but if they can really encourage the upsell. So just demonstrates them how, when you have the layer of detail, you can really drive your marketing and sales efforts, because you know I need to keep doing more to add to the profitability. So the third area then that we're just going to cover, which ties in with the other two, is really around the whole area of sales team or resource optimization. And we all know that the sales team really are at the core of the organisation. And in fact, Kaplan actually, when he was over, said that the most valuable asset that's off the balance sheet for every company is employees. And obviously within employees, the sales team are at the front. So really, sales team optimisation is all about ensuring that you have the right people in the right jobs, giving you the right results. And in the current environment, many of us with sales teams have had to re-look at what parts need to be improved. Do we need to do more business development, more retention, and really looking at the levels of admin activities and support activities that expensive sales resources are doing, and how we can move those off. So a key quote here from Peter Drucker: you can't manage what you can't measure. And really the other aspect of that is what gets measured gets done. So what we would do in working with any sales team, it's very much the first phase is really to look at all of the activities that people are doing and what is the percentage of time and what is the cost associated with those activities. So if you look at a sample report here of a field-based business where there's a team of account managers, and you'll see that, you know, with the best will in the world, the reality is when you went down to all of the activities, there's about 42%, you'll see on the left-hand side of the pie chart there, 42% of their time was in non-selling activities, in non-core activities that were not going to add value. And that may seem frightening, but I suppose, again, I would question each of us. We're so busy doing the work, getting through the day, that I would question each of us with ourselves and with our own teams to really look at where are we spending our time, how much or what percentage of our time on a daily or weekly basis is not adding value or really working on what is going to deliver results for us and for our businesses. And this can creep up over time. For example, CRM update, you put a new CRM system in and there's a learning curve in the beginning, and all of a sudden there's a huge percentage of time required to update that. Internal meetings, that maybe at the moment we've an awful lot of internal meetings to really micromanage the team and really get a handle on what's going on. But what is the total percentage of time? Is there better ways we could do those meetings? Have we a national sales team when we're bringing people to travel up to Dublin for a sales meeting when potentially we could use video conferencing or whatever? The other key thing to notice here is that if you look at the actual sales meetings, 25% of time is sales meetings with existing customers and 8% of time is sales meetings with new prospects. But if you have a mandate or requirement to drive new business, you need to ensure that the team have as much time as possible to be meeting their new prospects. Now, an element of that can be a comfort factor that, you know, people like to buy from people, and if you have strong relationships with your key customers, you tend to constantly go and visit them, and it's a human nature thing. So there's a behavioural aspect to all of this as well. It's not just about radically changing, but it's helping people change their mindset to the requirement that they need to spend more time in the field with new customers, as well as the metric piece on it as well. So this, as I said, is the starting point really to identify where the time is being spent. And when you see it in this type of information, it makes it all very clear in terms of, well, you know, I've shown percentages here, but when you add in what the cost is associated with all of that, it really crystallises the thinking as to something has to change. So in terms of cost savings, one of the things that you can do is obviously all those activities that take the 42% of the time, or whatever the percentage is in terms of non-core selling time, and what can you do to either move those activities to a lower cost base. So if you have a sales support or sales admin team, what admin activities can be moved off, how you can use technology, as I said there with video conferencing. Are there process improvements that you can put in place? Is there anything else that you can do? And using the methodology, you can actually get an actual cost associated with those process improvements. So if you need to put some technology in and you need to build a business case for that, there's actually a business case built for you to give you the opportunity to optimise your sales team. So the other area to look at in terms of sales team optimisation is if you look across different sales channels. So if you have your in-house team, you might have an outsourced team, you may have an indirect sales team. So when you have that layer of detail around the cost to acquire by channel, you can then make decisions. Okay, you know, channel A may be quite expensive, but we know that channel, those customers, the cost to serve is quite low, so therefore we can use those. or there may be certain campaigns that you'll use a channel for example, CPM with the feet on the street that Bord Gáis and Eircom have used. So that's, very clearly defined channel where they're out acquiring customers in a very fast way in the utility space. So using that channel to really get customers on board very, very quickly and build market share is a strong route to go. So as I said, the key thing is once you have that layer of information, you can then make decisions as to which is the best channel and most appropriate channel for the programme that you want to run. Another way to look at sales channel profitability, in this case example here, it was a client in the financial services space. So effectively all of their sales were done through brokers. And at the time they were dealing with about 200 brokers selling mortgages. Now obviously over the last few years the mortgage space has really contracted and there's not the same level of demand for mortgages as there once was. And they faced a challenge where these 200 brokers, but they just couldn't afford to support that number of brokers, so they needed to make choices. So part of the analysis that they did was to really look at the sales channel profitability on a per broker level. And what that really discovered for them was that it's not necessarily the brokers that come in with the most applications. So they took a more in-depth view of what was going on, and they looked at things like the conversion rates and also what the cost to serve those brokers were in terms of the cost per cheque issued. So when it came right down to the mortgage cheque being issued, what were the total costs for each of those transactions, which is represented here. And you see that one of the brokers was as high as 1,900, so almost €2,000 per cheque issued, whereas your more cost-effective broker was 992. And when they did some further delving in, they realised that Broker 3 did a lot more qualification themselves before they put the application in. So they spent a bit more effort to ensure that the client they were working with was going to yield a better conversion rate. So what this client did as an output of that, they took their 200 brokers and they slimmed it right down to their top 60. For those top 60, they give them a much better level of service, and they put like a pod or a team, a virtual team in place to work with those brokers so that they had an ongoing relationship with that team. So they had a sense of a much better level of service. And the other brokers, they moved them on to a self-serve route using the intranet. But again, just showing how you can maintain your business, you can get a better use out of your resources by just having that layer of information to hand. So some other case studies in the financial services, and I know Joe was going to cover Bord Gáis from a utility point of view and his own experience from a sales team. On an international basis, you have companies like Charles Schwab who are really looking at their business at this intense layer of detail. And as you've seen over the last number of years, with the huge global economic downturn, all of these financial services companies have had to make radical cost reduction. But what people who are in the zone of looking at their customer profitability or really looking at their cost to serve, they have taken what has been described as a scalpel approach to the cost cutting. So instead of making a percentage, 10% across the board in a part of the business, they have actually intensely looked at the parts of the business that are a very high cost to serve or are very unprofitable and taken that scalpel approach as opposed to a hatchet approach where you're just radically cutting across the board. And to the extent that someone like Charles Schwab has survived the economic downturn, where someone like Lehman Brothers hasn't. So it just puts it in context that, you can have really large companies out there, but the people that know the microeconomics of their business are the ones that really, really will survive. And in Irish context here, you have two companies, KBC and Zurich, that we've both worked with. KBC is one of the few Irish banks that has remained profitable through the economic storm. And they, over the last 4 or 5 years, and not just recently, but over the last 5 to 6 years, they've taken a very intense view of resource optimisation. So really looking at all of their staff and what is the right number of staff for each part of the business, and really looking at the cost of all the activities. Zurich, again, very, very operationally focused, and they would also have a lot of cross-training among their teams. So when their business hits a lot of peaks, and instead of pulling additional staff in externally, they intensely know where there's opportunities to move people from other teams across using the cross-training. So in summary, as I said, the 3 areas that we've covered and the key important areas for yourselves: what drives your profitability? So really to have that understanding of the customers, the markets, the sales channels. And once you have that understanding, you can then channel your efforts, your sales marketing efforts for that. what is your cost to serve a customer, and importantly as well, what is the cost of all the activities serving the customer. And if you know the cost of each of those activities, you can then put programs in place to automate or to reduce those costs down to drive up your profitability. And is your sales channel or sales team